Hello everyone. In this video, we will look at working with shapes. Working with shapes is super important. Whether you're creating a process chart, a diagram, or just a regular slide like an investment deck, you will have to work with a wide variety of shapes. In this video, I'm going to teach you the basics and then we go to some advanced topics as well. And I will be referring to a lot of these existing ideas that I have. Now, this is a compilation from various reports from the Big Four and the Big Three. So we will look at a few of these examples and then try and see how we can recreate it. Let us start with the basics first. The option for creating shapes is in Insert. And then in Insert, you have the Shapes option. Now the list that you see here has more or less been the same for longer than I can remember. Now while this might seem limiting in the sense that you don't seem to have an infinite number of options with you, do remember that you can mix and match and there is a lot of customizability that you will get as well. So we will start with something really simple. I'm going to start with a rectangle. That would be the fourth one in the first row. I click on it. Now when you select the shape, you notice that your arrow has changed into a crosshair, which means that now you can click and drag and you can create the shape like this. But here's the thing. You notice that as I click and drag, I can of course increase the size, but then it is not a square, it is a rectangle, which means that let us say you wanted to make a rectangle, it's easy. But if you wanted to create a square, it's a little tricky because how do you exactly know whether it's a square or not? That is something I'll cover in the subsequent examples. But for now, let's just create a rectangle. And here we go. We have a rectangle. Now, when the shape has been created, you will notice that a shape format option has appeared at the top. When you click outside the shape, you don't see that shape format. It is only visible when you have selected the shape that you have. So just so that you can remember all these things, I'm also sharing a screenshot here along with the text box. So the shape format option only appears when you select the shape like this. When you select the shape, you will notice that there is this arrow here that moves in 360 degrees. So this circular arrow is what allows you to rotate the shape. As you can see, I can just click on it and I can move it to rotate it like this. Let's look at this as well. So the circular arrow is used to rotate. Now here's a super tip for everyone. When you rotate it, you notice that it rotates freely. So it's quite hard for you to get, let us say, a 90 degree, or maybe you want to get something like a 30 degrees. What you can do here is you can press Alt along with the left and the right arrow. So the tip here is you can press Alt with left and the right arrow. And what this does is, as you can see, with the shape selected, if I press Alt and the right arrow and I click on it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 times, it rotates 90 degrees, which means that it rotates 15 degrees each time. So this is a very quick, efficient way of rotating the shape. As you can see, I can rotate a shape like this. Now, what are these white dots that you see? So you see them in the corners and you see them in the center and in the middle. So the white dots allow you to control the size. Now this is fairly simple to understand. If you choose any one of these, you notice that the cursor changes to this diagonal or this straight line, which is like a double-sided arrow. And this means that as you move it, you can change the size as well, like this. Now the tip that I would like to give you here is that if you would like to retain the dimension, let's take an example. So maybe I have a rectangle that looks like this. I can press Control and I can press Shift. Let's see the difference. So you notice that if I press the Control key and as I click on it, do you see what's happening? It's actually growing outside. In fact, let me keep it in the center so you can understand it better. If I press the Control button and I move it, you notice that I can basically make it smaller or larger like this. Now, what would happen if you don't do that? If you only click on it and drag it, then the top left corner remains fixed, right? But you can only grow it towards the right and at the bottom. On the other hand, if you press Control, it allows you to do this, right? So it's just a quick way of changing a shape into another shape. So when you press Control, it changes size in all the directions. What about Shift? So when I press the Shift key, now you notice that when I do the shift with the corners, any one of the four corners, it doesn't really change much. You notice that how it works without the shift, it works with the shift, but there's a big difference. If you do this without pressing the Shift key, you will notice that as I increase the size, the proportion of the length and the width do not remain the same. For example, as I move it, you notice that now the height is increasing, but the width is not, which is good because it offers you flexibility. But if you press the Shift key, now you notice that the proportion of the height and the width remain the same, which is great because sometimes you create a shape and you would like to retain the proportion of the height and the width. So it retains the proportion of the height and the width. See, these are really the type of topics that are super easy once you understand it, but then you really have to practice. By observing someone else do it is not good enough. You have to practice them yourself. Let's look at something else. If you want to make a shape to create, let's say, a square or a circle, you press the Shift key while drawing it. Let's have a look. So if I go to Insert Shapes and I try to create an oval, there is no option here for a circle. If I try to make an oval, you notice that it's not quite a circle. Like, it does help me with these guidelines, but it's still quite difficult. What do? We press the Shift key while I'm drawing it, and now you notice that it is performing, or rather forming, a perfect circle. Once the circle has been created, the same tip can be used. If you do not press the Shift key, then the circle will change into an oval as you increase the size. But if you press the Shift key and then you increase or decrease, you notice that it remains a perfect circle like this. The same thing can be done for a rectangle as well. If you select a rectangle, press the Shift while you're creating it, then it creates a perfect square. Now let us combine Control and Shift together. If you press Control and Shift and then you drag, this means that you are retaining the proportion. That means the square remains a square. That is possible with the shift. And because you're pressing Control, as you increase the size, you notice that it's increasing or decreasing the size, maintaining the center point like this. So it maintains the proportion and increases or decreases the size. Let's look at the next one. Now I want to take an example. So rather than just creating some empty boxes, let's look at a sample that we have. I want to pick one that would be most relevant to what we are currently covering. So maybe let's look at something like this. This is a report from a consulting firm. So this is from KPMG. Now the context here is not important. What we want to do is to create all these boxes that you see. Now, of course, you can do this on Excel using a heat map, but maybe you want to do this on PowerPoint. You just want to create different shapes that you can control, put a different color or some text in it. Now, imagine you want to create all of these rectangles perfectly sized and perfectly spaced. How much time it will take you? Let me show you how to do this. First of all, I'm going to create my first rectangle. On shape format, I can also select the shape fill and just put it into a blue color like this. If you want to keep the outline, you can select a color or you can select no outline as well. For now, I'm selecting no outline. I will circle back to these topics in a while. So that gives me my first rectangle. Now what I'm doing is I'm pressing Ctrl and Shift from center of shape and then drag. The difference is that if you select the corner and you press Ctrl and Shift, it goes outwards. Of course, if you press Ctrl and Shift from, let's say, the center or the middle, then it grows vertically or horizontally, of course. And finally, if you're pressing Ctrl and Shift from the center of the shape, you notice that it gives you this plus button. That means that you're creating a copy. So let's first understand individually how the Ctrl and the Shift work. So if I only press Ctrl, if I press Ctrl and click and move, you notice that it creates a copy like this. One more time, I'm pressing Ctrl, I'm clicking on the shape in the center, and then I'm moving it, and this allows me to create a copy freely. That means I can create a copy wherever I want, which is good. If you press Shift and you press click and you move, now you notice that you're not creating a copy, but as you move it, it's only moving in a horizontal or in a vertical direction. So this is very handy because if you have a shape or any object for that matter, and you want to move it either vertically or horizontally, you can follow this approach. So Shift and click and move only moves horizontally or vertically, and Control and click and move creates a copy. This means that if you press Control and Shift and then you move, what this does is it makes a copy. It creates a copy in a straight line. That means that if I press Ctrl and Shift and I move it, now I can only move it either vertically or horizontally. So let's say I want to move it a little to the right with a little bit of space. So I can do this, and then to repeat the action, I can either press Ctrl Y or F4. Both of them do the same thing. Just like Ctrl Z is for undo, Ctrl Y is for redo. So when I press Ctrl Y, it creates another copy. Let me do that 2 more times, 1 and 2. Now I can drag and select all the 5 shapes, and I will do the same thing. Press Ctrl and Shift move it down. That creates an entire second row. And then when I press Ctrl Y, it creates all these shapes. How nice is that? If you did not get it the first time, do not be in a hurry. Please practice. Rewind the video if you have to, but make sure that you understand these fundamentals really well, because you can save a lot of time when you're working by learning these tips and tricks. Let me write this down as well. So Ctrl plus Y or F4 repeats the action. Now the next thing I want to do is, I have already created all of these shapes, but then I might want to reduce the size. The problem is that if I select all of them and I select any one of the corners and I try to reduce it, it's reducing, but then the space is also increasing, and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group it by pressing Ctrl G. And then ungroup is Ctrl Shift and G. The same option is also available when you do a right click. So once I select all the shapes, I can do a right click and I can do a group like this. So all of them have now become one object. Now this means that if I press Shift and I decrease the size, you will notice that it's proportionally increasing or decreasing. Once you have reduced the size, then you can again press Ctrl, Shift and G to ungroup it. Up to you. So now you notice that the first block of shapes is ungrouped and the second block is grouped like this. But there's yet another thing. Maybe what we have done is we have created all of these shapes. I'm just going to increase the width a little bit. And you realize that maybe you want to increase the spacing between each subsequent shape. Now, of course, you will not come manually and move it like this because that's going to take you forever. So the trick here is that we can use the align option. So we can align our shapes. Let's see how to do that. So when I go to shape format, you will notice that we have an align option here. And we have left, center, right, top, middle, bottom, distribute horizontally and distribute vertically. So to explain the concept, I'm purposely making them a little scattered like this. So you notice that they're in a very bad shape. The spacing is not equal. Some of them are left, some of them are to the right. How am I going to fix this? In a few clicks, I will drag and select all of them. Then we go to shape format and align. And the first thing I'll do is I will align everything in the middle. This means that everything is going to come in one single line. But that doesn't help, right? Because I would like to have all the shapes shown separately. So let me undo that. And we will do align center. This way, everything is going to move only left and right, but it is going to come in a central line. That means the center of each shape will be in a straight vertical line like this. So that's one part of the job done. Next, I can do align and I can select distribute vertically. So now you notice that the spacing becomes equal. Now in the future, if you say, hey, I want to increase the space a little further, you just have to move the last one. Then I reselect all the shapes. One more time, I go to align and now you notice I have distribute vertically and now all the distances become equal. So what I've done here is I did a distribute vertically and then I also did align in the center. Super simple, right? The next thing I want to show you is how you can work with shapes as layers. For example, maybe I want to have one shape. I'm just changing the color here. So shape fill is green. And what I would like to do is to put the green at the back, right? And then I have another shape. Let me change the color here to something that you can see clearly, maybe to a blue color. And then this blue one is a little bigger. Now here's the thing, right? How do I see the other two shapes that are here? That means these two shapes are like this, but then I would like to arrange it in a way that the layers can be controlled. For example, what if the blue one comes on the top? Maybe you created it later. What we're going to do here is, if I right click on the shape, there are these options which is bring to front and send to back. So in bring to front, I can bring it to the absolute front, which means that it will be the first shape of my slide, like this. Or if I send it to the back, then it goes as the absolute last shape on the slide. So it's going behind this and behind the green color. If you want to control it a little better, then you can do it step by step. I can do send to back, but not select send to back because that will send it to the absolute back. I can send it backward. And do you see what happened? Now one of these shapes has come in the front. I'll do it one more time. Send to back and send backward like this. Another tip here is that if you cut and paste something, for example, let's say that the two shapes that you want to put in front of the blue, if you just drag and select like this, I do a Control X and a Control V, it will always come in the front. So there are quite a few ways of doing this. Do as you are comfortable, but just make sure that you understand the concept of layers really well, because when you're working with complicated slides, you will have a lot of objects on the slide and you are expected to know how the layers work. One more suggestion. When I select any shape, in shape format, I have something called the selection pane. The selection pane shows you every single object that is there on the slide right now. So you can see that we have these 4 shapes which are rectangles, and I also have a text box. And here you have the option of hiding it. You have the option of locking it as well. What does that mean? Let us say I select my green shape. I can also rename it if I want. So I'm going to call this my green rectangle. Now, if I hide it, then it is hidden so that I accidentally don't make any changes to it. And if I lock it, this means that even if I try to, I can't select and move it. This is really handy because now when I drag and select, even though I'm selecting the area which has the green shape in it, it won't move. As you can see, I'm only moving the other shapes. The green one doesn't move, which is very useful. This is in fact a very new feature, came in PowerPoint, I think in early 2022 or 2023 or late 2022. So we have seen layers, we have seen the selection pane, and I've also shown you how we can lock visuals, right? So lock and hide visuals. Let's do one more example. So I'm taking one of these shapes. You can also do a right click to lock and unlock it like this. Now imagine that I have a shape on this slide and I have a shape on the next slide as well. And we would like them to be in the same position. To do this, I'm going to select the first slide, and on view, we have the option of grid lines and guides. For now, I'm choosing my guide. So it gives me a vertical and a horizontal guide. As you can see, you can also delete them if you want. So for example, if I delete all of them and then I make a new one, then you only get a vertical and a horizontal guide. So I'm going to select this and move it to the left so that it aligns with my shape perfectly. The same thing here for the horizontal guide as well. Now this guide will appear on all the slides. So even on the next slide, I know exactly where I have to put my shape. So I can just move it and put it here. So the topic I've covered here is how you can use guide to align. Let me put a screenshot as well. Like this. And the option is available in view, and then you have guides. Let's also look at how shapes can be merged with each other. Now, I'm not going to cover this topic entirely because it's a pretty detailed topic and there's a lot of hidden trial and practice that all of you will need to do. But let me try to find an example where I can show you a ready-made illustration or an infographic and then all of us try to recreate it. So let me see something that I like. Maybe something like this. Now, if you notice here, we have these two circles with us. So we have South Korea and China. Let's try to create something like this. So I'm coming back. I'm creating two circles. Remember, we can press the Shift key to make a perfect circle. So that's one. And then let's just copy this one. Press the Shift key and then make it larger like this. Now imagine that you would like to have two different colors. So maybe one of them is a blue, the other one is a green. But I would also like the area that is overlapping, that is common, to be a third color. How do we do that? For this, I'm going to select both of them, right? Now see very carefully what are the different options that we have with us. Let's make a few more copies. So I'm going to select both of the circles. When I go to shape format, I have an option for merge shapes. If I select a union, then it essentially combines both of them into a single shape. As you can see, like this. How nice is that? So you're actually creating a shape that was not originally there on PowerPoint. The second option I have is to select combine. Combine means that the area that was common between them has now become not just white color, but it has become transparent. How do I show that to you? You will notice that as I move this, do you see that I can actually see what is behind this shape? So this is like a cutout, right? You can actually see what is behind these two shapes. In the next two, I will select fragment. Now this is the one that we originally wanted. The fragment converts all of the two circles into three different shapes, which is very cool because now this allows me to have different colors for all the three parts that have been created like this. And then of course you have a few others. So I have the intersect, which means that only the common area is retained. And then we have the subtract, which means that the part of the first smaller circle, which was overlapped with the other circle, has been subtracted. Now this you have to understand really well because it depends on what order you select the two shapes in. Let me explain that. If you notice, if I select the first circle, the smaller one, and then the larger one as the second, and then I do a subtract, then only the first one remains. On the other hand, if I select the second circle before, and then I select the smaller one, which is the first one, now you notice that the part of the second bigger circle that was overlapped with the smaller circle has been cut out like this. So I'm just sharing a screenshot of where the options are. So we want to go to merge shapes. And of course, we have quite a few different options that have been given here. This is really the sort of a topic, everyone, where it's not that difficult to understand, but when you try to use it yourself, some trial and error will be required. A lot of time you see a ready-made illustration and you know you want to create that infographic or that visual or that chart, and you're not quite sure which one of these you will have to use. And that's okay. You will only learn it with a lot of practice. So make sure not to give up in the first go, but to practice a lot. There are, of course, a lot of other small things that I haven't covered. So things like how you can select a shape and then change the height and the width manually. We have done the rotation, the grouping, the alignment. I've shown you the selection pane, bring forward, send backward. The colors, the outline, and the effects we will do in the next video where I talk about how to use colors. You can also convert a shape that you've already created into a different shape by selecting change shape and edit it to a different shape like this. So that about covers this video, everyone. I hope all of you have practiced whatever you have learned. If you haven't, please make sure to do that. PowerPoint is not difficult when you break down the topics into individual topics. It's just that there are so many small things that you have to learn, and you have to learn how to do it really fast. That is how you will improve your speed and the quality of your presentations.